They thought they could humiliate him for sitting by his own pool, but what happened next left the whole neighborhood cheering. The day was bright, warm, and perfect, the kind of afternoon that made Marcus feel grateful for the small joys of life. He had worked hard all week and finally had a chance to relax. The pool at his apartment complex shimmered like glass under the sun, reflecting the clear blue sky above. Marcus carried a towel over his shoulder, a book in one hand and a cold bottle of water in the other. It wasn't much, but to him it felt like luxury, a chance to breathe, to rest, to enjoy his own space without the noise of work or the stress of the city. He found a chair near the corner of the pool, close enough to dip his feet in the cool water but far enough to feel tucked away in his own little world. Sliding down into the seat, he spread his towel, leaned back and closed his eyes. The gentle hum of the city seemed far away here, replaced by the sound of water rippling softly and birds calling in the distance. A faint breeze brushed across his skin, carrying with it the smell of fresh-cut grass from the groundskeeper who had been working earlier in the day. Everything felt calm, almost perfect. Marcus pulled out his phone, set his music on low, and smiled as the soft rhythm filled the air. It was his ritual. A book, some music, the warmth of the sun on his skin, and the calm of the pool. For a man who worked long hours, moments like this were precious. He opened his book and began to read, but more often than not, he found himself staring at the clear blue water, letting his thoughts drift. It was the kind of peace he wished he could hold on to forever. As time passed, a few children splashed in the shallow end, their laughter filling the space with innocence and joy. Parents watched from the sidelines, chatting quietly. Nobody seemed to mind Marcus sitting there. In fact, a few neighbors waved hello and he waved back, feeling at home in the community he had been part of for years. He had paid his rent, he had his key fob, and he belonged here just as much as anyone else. He leaned back, put on his sunglasses, and let himself sink into the comfort of the moment. The sun warmed his skin and the cool water at his feet balanced it out, making him feel as though the world outside the gates didn't exist. For Marcus, the pool wasn't just water and concrete, it was a small escape, a reminder that life wasn't only about working and struggling. It was also about pausing, breathing, and allowing yourself to enjoy the space you've earned. But as he reached for his bottle of water and took a sip, he noticed a shadow cross over the pool gate. At first, he thought it was just another neighbor coming in, but the sound of heavy boots and the sight of two uniforms made his chest tighten. His peaceful afternoon, so carefully carved out of a busy life, was about to take a turn he never expected. The peace around the pool broke the moment the two officers walked through the gate. Their footsteps were sharp, and their eyes scanned the area as if they were hunting for trouble. Marcus sat up slowly, unsure why they were there, but before he could even say a word, one of them pointed at him. "You," the officer barked. "Stand up. Let me see some ID." Marcus blinked, confused. "Excuse me? Is something wrong?" he asked politely, trying to keep his voice calm. "Don't play games," the second officer snapped, walking closer. "We've had reports of someone trespassing in this pool. You fit the description. Now get up and show us who you are." Marcus felt a chill run through him. Reports? Trespassing? This was his home, his pool, his community. He had his resident key fob right there in his bag, but their tone wasn't just about checking. It was sharp, heavy, and filled with suspicion. He slowly stood, keeping his hands visible, aware of how quickly situations like this could spiral. "This is my apartment complex," Marcus explained calmly. "I live here. I can show you proof, but I need you to understand I haven't done anything wrong." But the officers weren't listening. They circled him like he was already guilty. One of them looked at his chair and his bag, then at his phone and towel, as if these simple items somehow didn't belong to him. "People don't just sit around here," the officer muttered. "You sure you're not visiting someone who actually lives here?" Marcus clenched his jaw but forced himself to stay calm. He wanted to shout, to tell them how insulting this was, but he knew better. Anger wouldn't help. Instead, he said clearly, "I've lived here for 3 years. My name is Marcus. Apartment 304. I have my resident card right here." Still, the officers pressed him. "We'll need to see your driver's license," one demanded. "And don't make any sudden moves." The words were cold, almost threatening. Marcus moved slowly, reaching for his wallet inside his bag. Around the pool, people were beginning to notice. Parents paused their conversations, children stopped splashing. Phones started lifting into the air. Neighbors knew what they were seeing and they wanted it recorded. Marcus handed over his license, and the officer looked at it for a long time as if trying to find something wrong. The silence felt heavy. Finally, the officer asked, "What are you doing here today?" Marcus raised his eyebrows. "What am I doing here? I'm sitting by the pool." Exactly what this space is for. Is that a problem? His voice was steady but his heart pounded in his chest. The officers exchanged a glance but neither backed down. One of them muttered again about trespassing and looking suspicious. Marcus realized then, it didn't matter that he lived here, it didn't matter that he had proof. They had already decided he didn't belong. And that was the moment the crowd started to lean in, their cameras aimed, their voices low but ready to rise. Something was about to shift, and Marcus knew he had to stand firm. Marcus stood tall, his patience wearing thin but his calm never breaking. The officers kept circling him with questions that made less and less sense, as if they were hoping to trap him into saying something wrong. But Marcus knew the truth was on his side, and he wasn't about to let them drag him into a shouting match. Instead, he decided it was time to put an end to the game. Slowly and deliberately, he reached into his bag and pulled out a small black fob. It glinted in the sunlight, the same key every resident needed to unlock the pool gate. He held it high in the air, making sure not only the officers saw it, but also the neighbors standing nearby with their phones recording every second. "This," Marcus said firmly, "is my proof. You can't even open that gate without one of these." The officers froze for a moment, but Marcus wasn't done. He reached back into his bag and pulled out his resident card with his name, apartment number, and the complex logo stamped clearly across it. He held it up with a steady hand, his eyes locked on theirs. "And this," he continued, "is my resident ID. I live here. I pay rent here. I swim here whenever I want. So tell me again, what exactly am I trespassing on?" A ripple went through the crowd. Neighbors murmured and shook their heads. Some even laughed under their breath. The absurdity of the officers' accusations laid bare for everyone to see. The children who had been quietly watching now pointed and whispered to their parents, their innocent voices cutting through the tense air. The officer's confident posture began to falter. One of them shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tight. The other glanced toward the cameras pointed directly at him, realizing that every word and every move was being captured. They hadn't expected Marcus to be so prepared, so composed. They wanted him nervous, angry, maybe even reckless. Instead, he had turned their interrogation into a performance where the truth was undeniable, and the audience wasn't on their side. Marcus didn't raise his voice. He didn't curse or insult them. He simply stood his ground, holding his proof like a shield, his calmness a weapon more powerful than anger. His silence after showing the evidence spoke louder than any argument. The message was clear. The officers weren't protecting anyone. They were harassing a man who belonged exactly where he was. For the first time since they entered, the officers looked uncertain. The power they carried into the pool area had started to slip away. Their badges and uniforms couldn't erase the simple facts in Marcus's hands. And worse for them, the neighborhood had witnessed everything. Marcus took a deep breath and placed his resident card back into his wallet. He didn't break eye contact as he did it. "Now," he said calmly, his voice steady and firm, "are you satisfied? Or do you plan to waste more of my afternoon trying to prove something that isn't true?" The silence that followed was heavy, but in that silence Marcus knew he had just taken control of the moment. The stillness of the moment didn't last long. As Marcus stood there with his resident card in hand, the whispers from the crowd began to rise into clear, sharp voices. A woman near the gate shouted, "He lives here. We've seen him 100 times. Another man added, "You need to leave him alone. This is harassment." The officers, who had once seemed so commanding when they entered, now looked uneasy as dozens of eyes bore into them. Phones were everywhere now. Mothers who had been watching their children play turned their cameras directly on the officers. Young neighbors angled for the best shot, some even speaking loudly to make sure the recording picked up every word. "It's all on video," someone yelled. "Every second of it. We're not letting this get swept under the rug." The officers exchanged quick glances, their stiff confidence beginning to crack. They hadn't expected resistance, not from Marcus and certainly not from an entire community. What they had walked into with authority they were now trapped in with judgment. Their accusations, once spoken with force, now hung in the air like foolish lies. Marcus didn't move. He simply stood there, calm and steady as the crowd's voices grew stronger. It was the people around him who carried the fight now. "Why are you even here?" a father called out, his arm around his young daughter. "This man has done nothing. We've been sitting here the whole time. You're embarrassing yourselves." The officers tried to regain control. One of them raised his voice saying, "We're just doing our job." Someone called in a report. But the crowd was no longer willing to accept excuses. "A report?" a woman shouted back. Or did you just decide he looked suspicious because of his skin color? Murmurs of agreement rolled through the poolside like a wave, the truth pressing against the officers harder than any law could. Marcus finally spoke, his tone quiet but powerful enough for everyone to hear. "You came here looking for a problem," he said, "but the only problem here is how you treated me in front of my neighbors in my own home." His words cut through the air, and the crowd responded instantly, clapping and cheering, their voices echoing off the apartment walls. The officers looked smaller now, their presence shrinking under the weight of so many watching eyes. They had come in expecting control, but instead they were surrounded by proof of their own misconduct. Proof that was being recorded, shared, and soon would be impossible to hide. One officer shifted on his feet, clearly wanting to leave, while the other forced a stern expression that no longer carried any weight. The community had turned. What began as whispers was now a storm of support for Marcus and outrage against the officers. The balance of power had flipped completely. Marcus didn't need to fight, the truth was fighting for him. And as the officers struggled to hold on to their authority, it was clear to everyone at the pool, they had already lost it. The poolside was buzzing with energy. Neighbors clapped, shouted, and recorded, their voices rising like a shield around Marcus. The two officers, once so loud and forceful, now stood cornered by nothing more than truth and community. They shuffled their feet, the weight of every camera lens making their badges feel heavy. For the first time since they arrived, they had no words left to twist, no authority strong enough to cover their mistake. Marcus could have exploded in anger. He could have shouted insults or thrown their cruelty back in their faces. But instead he did something far more powerful. He sat back down in his chair, slowly, deliberately, as if reclaiming the very peace they had tried to steal. Sliding on his sunglasses, he leaned back, crossed his legs, and said in a calm, steady voice that carried across the pool, "Now if you don't mind, I'd like to enjoy my pool." The crowd erupted. Cheers, whistles, and laughter filled the air. Parents clapped, children giggled, and neighbors called out Marcus's name with pride. The officers, red-faced and powerless, turned toward the gate. Their retreat was silent, their once heavy boots now sounding hollow against the concrete. With every step they took, the cheers grew louder, like victory bells ringing them out of the community they had disrespected. Marcus watched them leave without another word. He didn't need to gloat. He didn't need revenge. The truth had spoken for him, and the crowd had sealed it. He took a sip from his water bottle, letting the cool taste wash away the heat of the encounter, and for the first time since they arrived, he allowed himself a quiet smile. He had won, not through anger but through dignity. As the noise began to settle, neighbors came closer. A woman with her young son patted Marcus on the shoulder. "You handled that better than anyone I've ever seen," she said warmly. A man from the other side of the pool added, "You taught them a lesson they won't forget." Marcus nodded humbly, thanking them, but inside he knew the lesson wasn't just for the officers. It was for everyone watching, young and old, the reminder that calmness and truth were stronger than arrogance and hate. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long golden shadows over the water. Children went back to splashing, parents relaxed again, and the pool slowly returned to its natural rhythm of laughter and joy. But something had changed. The community felt closer, stronger, united by what they had just witnessed. And Marcus, still sitting in his chair, knew this moment would live far beyond a single afternoon. That day he had been treated like he didn't belong. But by the end he had shown everyone, neighbors, officers, and anyone who would see the videos later, that he belonged more than ever. He belonged because he carried himself with grace, with patience, and with a power that no badge or uniform could ever take away. And as Marcus closed his eyes again, letting the warmth of the sun return him to peace, one truth became clear. Sometimes the greatest victory is not in the fight, but in the calm that follows, when dignity speaks louder than any shout.